Hello, folks. Take your seats, please, or stand if you really want to, but there's plenty of space. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Grit City Think and Drink. Welcome back after a summer hiatus. We take the summer off because, one, it's about 112 degrees in here during the summer, and there's that fan to cool you off. So we take a break. And we are back. So this is our first talk of the fall season. Thanks to Pam for coming and being our first. So anybody new to the Grit City Think and Drink here? Anybody new? Excellent. And everybody knows the rule, right? New guy buys the beer. So appreciate bringing new people in, Helen. Great idea. Thank you. So we are kicking off the next season. So we already have the rest of 2025 lined up. Just a big word. So November 12th, it's going to be a Wednesday instead of our normal Tuesday. So it's going to be the second Wednesday of the month because the Tuesday is a holiday. So we'll be here. Dan Holmes is going to come down from UW Genome Sciences and talk about the Human Genome Project and what's going on with that. It'd be very cool. We have a speaker talking about engineering in December. So if you have ideas for other speakers, if you want to give a talk, let me know. We have January through June open, and we're looking. I haven't put out feelers yet, but I'd love to get ideas for some new folks from any institution is great. So love to have you. So the way this works, I will introduce our speaker. She will give you an amazing talk. Sorry to boost that. She will give you an amazing talk. Then we'll take a short break. You'll get, if you haven't gotten a raffle ticket already, we will give away some prizes. And then we'll come back and do a Q&A, and you can play Stump the Speaker after that. Cool. I feel like we should make people dance their question though, just because. So that way, yeah. So we're making this up on the fly. So if you are not on the mailing list or the email list for this, you can scan the QR code or you can get it on later. And all I do is send out the announcements for the talks, nothing else. I don't ask for money or for puppies, but you can go do that, or you can go just Google Grit City Think and Drink, and you can find what's coming up. You can also see ones you missed. So whenever Jim doesn't screw up the AV equipment, there's good recordings of the talks, and you can check out what you missed and share it with your friends. So without further ado, I will introduce our speaker. As soon as I can get stuff off my screen. Hey, Dr. Pam Cramble is an associate professor of film and media studies at the University of Washington, Tacoma, right down the street. She is a media historian and classically trained ballet dancer. Nice. I am not, who has spent the last 10 years researching dance on screens. You can order her new book, White Screens. Oh, hold it up. White Screens, Black Dance, Race and Masculinity in the United States at Mid-Century. From King's Books or online retailers at UW-T, Dr. Cramble teaches courses on film, music, video, media genres, and popular culture. Without further ado, Cam.
Thank you, Jim, for always putting on the Think and Drink. One of my very first experiences in Tacoma was a Think and Drink when I first moved here in 2019, back when it was at the Swiss. So I'm so excited to be here. Thank you all for being here. That's what I look like under the mask. This is what I tell my students at the beginning of every class. I'm immunocompromised, so this is going to stay on. Just imagine my face, if you would. Yeah, let me jump in here. So today's talk is called Masculinities and Dance on Screen, from Old Musicals to TikTok. These are all screenshots from TikTok. And I just realized I don't have my talk in front of me. Please hold. Okay, here we go. So if you or your kids have spent any time on TikTok, the social media smartphone application, in the past 5 or 6 years, you know that the default genre of video on what users call straight talk or mainstream TikTok is the dance video. So most of the app's millions of daily users, the majority of whom are under 30 years old, have spent the past several years being inundated daily with dancing bodies on their For You pages, even if that's not the content they seek out. Of course, it's not as if there aren't plenty of other places where we're all exposed to recorded dance. Foremost is YouTube, especially since it has become the primary repository for music video in the post-MTV era. And for those of us who still watch that now antiquated form of once new media called network television, I'm looking at my communication studies colleagues, there are still plenty of dance competition shows to watch. So You Think You Can Dance is on its 18th season, and Dancing with the Stars just started its 34th season. So there's plenty of dance for you to see. But one thing that's really remarkable about TikTok is how much of it is dance as compared to, say, the entirety of YouTube or the entirety of network or cable television. Really, the very backbone and origin of young people's favorite app is dance on this little handheld screen. The same cannot be said for any other major media phenomenon of our time. And TikTok is a major media phenomenon. As of 2023, fully 1/3 of all US adults reported using the app. And as of 2024, 63% of US teenagers reported using it. In fact, the only app or site that had a higher percentage of teen users than TikTok was YouTube. Sorry, Facebook, X, Snapchat, and even Instagram, not you. And like all forms of media, TikTok's primary function is to communicate. For my part, as a dance media historian, and there aren't a ton of us, believe me, as a dance media historian, I'm here to tell you that one of the primary ways that TikTok communicates is through its viral dances. They may appear on the surface to just be a fun little thing to do, especially because they really hit their peak during the widespread lockdowns of the more acute COVID era when young people were quite bored at home. But please hear me when I say there is no such thing as innocent, non-ideological media, which this audience may already know. One of the major things that TikTok communicates through its dances is usually normative gender ideology. And no, I don't mean it the way that right-wing ringers talk about it. So in other words, these dances performed over and over by various bodies who inhabit the moves in slightly different ways implicitly tell us how to perform a gender identity through dance. Girls should emphasize their hips and butts and occasionally their long hair, the dancers seem to say, in order to look alluring. Boys should emphasize bicep muscles, their package or crotch, and their general swagger. And yes, straight talk is quite binary in this way, though there are thousands of smaller accounts that challenge said binary. Through repetition, the dancers quietly tell us not only how to move our bodies in gender appropriate and appealing ways, but also how those bodies should look, be styled, and carry themselves. And of course, the us on the receiving end of these messages is primarily young people who are still figuring out who they are and how they want to be seen. So it's particularly impactful. Now, speaking of dominant gender ideologies, it may at this point be occurring to you that actually boys aren't really supposed to dance much at all. Little girls are supposed to go to dance class, but little boys are supposed to be busy with sports teams. This is the great divide of the hegemonic gender embodiment expectations in the United States and has been for over a century now. If they dance at all, boys and men are only supposed to dance insofar as they're dancing with girls or women as part of a courtship ritual. So think school dances, dance clubs, etc. So why are boys solo or small group dancing on TikTok at all? Well, two reasons. First of all, the boys shouldn't dance narrative historically really only applies to white men in the United States, and I'll come back to that history in a few minutes. Second, when there's a widespread cultural phenomenon, something like TikTok or television or talkie cinema or blackface minstrelsy, yes, these are all intentionally chosen examples where dancing men are widespread in a major mass cultural medium, white men cannot help but be involved. In fact, let me bring in another expectation of normative American masculinity here. When there's a widespread cultural phenomenon in this country, white men generally need to be driving it or profiting from it, ideally both. So the thing is, just like on TikTok, dancing men across all those earlier mass mediums I mentioned, television, cinema, blackface minstrelsy, also produced masculine ideals, models I call them, of masculinity that their bodies demonstrated for all who watched them. And in fact, you can pretty much draw a line from 1930s screen danced masculinities to contemporary ones. So this is where my book comes in. Forgive the shameless plug. Out now and purchasable from Oxford University Press, where you can use my 30% off discount code or wherever you buy your books. White Screen's Black Dance, Race and Masculinity in the United States at Mid-Century does talk about both TikTok and blackface minstrelsy at the end and beginning respectively, but it really focuses on the mid-20th century because I am convinced that what I call the long mid-century, so between the 1940s and the 1960s, when both of the most enduring forms of recorded visual media in the United States were in a so-called golden age of dominance, and that's sound, film, and television. This is when multiple versions of hegemonic masculinity were established through dance on screen. So these models of masculinity did not appear out of thin air, of course. They were inherited and modified and performed in relation to lots of other ideas about masculinity. But the mid-century images are rather enduring, in the same way that we're still working with masculinities constructed and modeled by men in Westerns or film noir detective stories. It is my contention that the very famous and beloved starring men who danced in musicals and then on variety television also bequeathed us some enduring ways of inhabiting, or shall we say, dancing masculinity. So for the rest of the talk, I'll show you a sprinkling of examples from the case studies in my book to begin to trace that line of dance on screen masculinity from like right before World War II all the way to our present with TikTok. I'm also going to give away the big reveal right now. That through line is undergirded the entire time by African-American vernacular dance, or what most scholars of the topic today just refer to as Black dance. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with Black dance as a concept, or with the aesthetic distinction between Africanist and European dance, I'm just going to provide a quick explainer. My favorite definition of Black dance comes from cultural historian Richard A. Long in 1989. He says, quote, Black dance, Black stance, and Black gesture are nonverbal patterns of body gestures and expressions which are distinctly Black African or originate from their descendants elsewhere, unquote. Soon after this, in the 1990s, major dance scholar Brenda Dixon Gottschalk delineated the key characteristics of what she calls Africanist performance, which are best understood in contrast to Europeanist movement idioms. So very quickly, Europeanist dance forms, such as ballet, as well as Irish step dance and square dance, all operate according to a logic of solidity. So straightened torso, tightened core muscles, and a high center of gravity around which the limbs revolve. In contrast, Africanist forms such as tap dance, jazz dance, and hip hop operate according to a logic of flexibility. This is a movable torso, counterbalanced and shifting contractions of different muscle groups, and a low center of gravity that allows any body part to become the focal point. Another helpful scholar for understanding Black dance, especially as it applies to what are called vernacular or social dances, and this is the form of dance that are practiced in communities rather than performed on stages, is Thomas DeFrance. He has a great quote. Common movements in the Black vernacular dances of the early 20th century, he explains, include, quote, extravagant body part isolations, especially in sinewy or sudden motions of the pelvis and spine, and rolling gestures of the torso, shoulders, elbows, and knees in unexpected continual waves or accented rhythmic jerking. The snake hips dance, popularized by the impressive performances of Earl Snake Hips Tucker, emphasized successional movements that included the hips and pelvis, coupled with twisting motions of the feet. And I'm gonna let snake hips play a little bit. I'll cut forward to show you just the sheer variety of really fascinating movements that were already present in 1930. Uh-oh. No, don't start over. Just let me click forward. No. I can't skip forward, apparently. That's unfortunate. Okay, we just have to sit for a second. So as you'll see, we have some of those rolling movements of the legs and torso, the lack of solidity, the ability to be sort of off kilter and flexible. And in a moment, you're going to see, yeah, it's almost like he's breakdancing. Just incredible flexibility in the pelvis and knees. So these are core elements of Africanist or Black dance here. Oh, all right. DeFrance also helpfully recorded a useful explainer video on the two most basic components of Black social dance that you continue to see even today. And I'm going to play it because I want you to remember what he teaches you about the buck and the wing, because it will be relevant later in the talk. So here's Professor DeFrance in 2012. Oh, it's so quiet.
Still community dance forms that came about in the 19th century. The Black social dances in the Americas, we have to remember, those had huge influence the world over. And they developed after the Middle Class period, when African Americans had to figure out ways to kind of be outside of the controlling eye of clergy. A lot of these dances were ones that were restricted by white stakeholders who were really only interested in dances that were usually identified with the Christian movement. So there are three kinds of dances that emerged in the 19th century that become very important. And these are buck dances, wing dances, and jigs. So buck dances were forms that were very, very percussive and weighted down to the foot. Buck dances, lock and roll down the foot, and all these dances are really percussive. Now, wing dances are really important and have a lot more kind of visibility in the 20th century and the 21st century. Wing dances are dances where you literally flap parts of the body, like as if they're wing. So these are all the dances kind of get down here like this with the knees. You might see these dances with Russian dances like this, but also with the arms.
All right, so hold on to those, please. As for the question of how these dances are able to communicate masculinity, we have to remember that gender is constituted by the performance of signs whose meanings are not fixed and mean differently in conjunction with race and class. Some of the signs that have meant differently in conjunction with race in particular, since at least the 1830s in the United States, are those very Black or Africanist dance movements. When performed by first enslaved and then free African Americans, these movements signified fugitive joy and kinship within community, often in the face of horrifically dehumanizing circumstances. But in the eyes of enslavers and other outsider whites, they were exotic, evocative, and even mesmerizing. And when performed by men, these movements were also mapped onto constructions of Black men as hypersexual and uncivilized others. Thus, when performed by lower-class white men who participated in blackface minstrelsy, including famous and documented numbers like T.D. Rice's Jump Jim Crow, these movements worked to both caricature and demean Black men, and this is the part we often forget about, to subtly reaffirm the white performer's masculinity. After all, if the Black man's looser gait, more mobile hips, and cool abandon were tied to his virility in the eyes of whites, a white man who could replicate them must also be relatively virile, no? This was one of the many cultural logics of blackface minstrelsy, solidified over the course of the 100 years when blackface minstrelsy was most often the primary form of American mass culture. So part of what my book works to do, and what I'll give you a taste of today, is demonstrate the legacy of this white masculinity as appropriated Black masculinity, tracing it past the moment in the 1930s when the visible blackface part begins to fade away and new forms of mass culture take over. At the same time, though, I seek to recenter Black men as not only the proper owners of Black dance, but as equally impressive stars who built equally long-standing models of masculinity through that dance. So what are the masculinities that could be signified as blackface minstrelsy finally loosened its hold on American culture? Well, for Black men in the United States at mid-century, the options remained few and fraught, with public discourses trapping them in a paradox between invisibility and hypervisibility. All of the hypervisible options descended fairly directly from two sets of stereotypes: those constructed by blackface minstrelsy and those constructed by Harriet Beecher Stowe's 1852 novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. In particular, the prevalence of Black male dancers performing buck and wing dances, like DeFrance showed us, often on street corners, but also on stages and film screens during the early 1900s, both fed and was fed by the stereotype of the coon. Film scholar Donald Bogle sets apart the coon from other negative stereotypes of African American men in film as purely an amusement object that depicts the Black male as lazy and shiftless. His dances appear simple and organic, a natural expression of his empty-headedness. A subgenre of this category is the pickaninny, a singing and dancing African American child. During the vaudeville era of the early 1900s, many Black dancers started as picks only because it was one of the few ways for Black folks to enter show business. That the coon and young pick are defined by their entertainment value, by dancing itself, highlights one of white Americans' long-held and fundamentally racist assumptions about Black Americans, which is that they are inherent performers, innately good at singing, dancing, and feats of athleticism. So any Black dancer during the first half of the 20th century, including Snake Hips Tucker himself, would have had to constantly dodge and parry association with either the young pick or the adult coon stereotype. One of the biggest sets of Black male dancing stars at mid-century, the Nicholas brothers, called upon their upper middle class upbringing to avoid these stereotypes. Let's watch them for a moment. Oh. I'll let them keep playing because I can talk over them. So from the beginning of their career as children, which you see here, their parents dressed them in immaculate tailored suits. Together with their complex but precise tapping and graceful arm movements, this manner of dress allowed Harold and Fayard Nicholas to build a masculinity of dignity and class as they grew up and graced the silver screen more and more frequently. Look at them shaking hands. Okay. On the other hand, the pickaninny stereotype was much harder to avoid in the early career of young Sammy Davis Jr. As part of the Will Maston trio, accompanying Sammy Davis Sr., his father, and close family friend Will Maston, Davis was barely making enough money in the vaudeville and cinematic short subject industries to eat. So they could not afford to be so picky about respectable representation. And you can kind of see his like bedraggled pants here and his squished hat, right? He does not look put together as the Nicholas brothers look put together. Also, he performed in blackface as a child, right? And so really, really closely following in the footsteps of minstrelsy here. It's not a very big leap. All right. On the other hand, white men at mid-century faced the constant requirement to prove their masculinity. While the immediate cause was arguably their return from World War II to find women doing their jobs, this pressure can be traced back to the turn of the 19th century, when white manhood became entangled with the competitive values of modern capitalism. No longer defined by communal and familial relations, white men were also pressured to demonstrate a self-made manhood that fused male identity to the workplace. And then by the early 20th century, there was a shift in ideology from a manliness focused on character traits and morals to a masculinity characterized by physical strength and aggression. This is the point at which femininity as weakness began to be invoked as a threat to it. So at this time, some of the most dominant means of proving masculinity for white men were corporeal, including bodybuilding, baseball, and athletics. More generally, all became widely popular. Physical bodily fitness was rhetorically linked to mental spiritual fitness, and together the two defined a desirable, powerful white masculinity. And by mid-century, as the white middle class grew and white men found themselves doing less physical labor and more office work, there was even more need to prove that one was not a sissy. So how on earth could these expectations be translated into something so graceful and artistic as dance, you might ask? Enter Gene Kelly. Kelly's initial strategy is to emphasize muscles and athletics in his dancing. And I'm going to play you a clip from a TV special in which he literally argued that dancing is a man's game and will very explicitly connect dance to athletics. Oh no, I hope we can hear him. We can't really. Okay, I'll tell you what he's saying. He's gonna talk about a baseball player, I think it's Mickey Mantle, and then he's like, look, this can be a dance move too. And now he's gonna demonstrate how it can also be a dance move. And now he's going to go through a series of sports stars of the time and have them demonstrate what they do as part of their sport, followed by a dancer doing the dance version of that movement. And you'll see it with multiple sports. There's your basketball player. Tennis player. Football player. And so on. He's eventually going to put them all together in a little modern dance of his own. All right. Okay, so we see Kelly's strategy, muscles, athletics. The problem is this is not quite enough to make him not only manly, but also cool. So we return to the masculine logic of minstrelsy. Perhaps white men could somehow channel the black man's dance virility. In fact, Gene Kelly resorted to just that. He used a number of strategies to channel black masculinity over the course of his career. From on the right-hand side, you will shortly see him literally dissolving into an image of black dancer Chocolat. This is in An American in Paris in 1951. So there he is next to Chocolat. There's Chocolat. And there's Gene Kelly as Chocolat. Fortunately, he's not in blackface. Okay, he also used other strategies like dancing alongside black dancers, including the Nicholas brothers, to sort of channel their skill and style. And finally, he also just simply stole moves and copied styles without direct attribution or visible connection. I call this practice black bodying, whereby non-black performers use black dance and movement styles. Black bodying is a cousin of blackface minstrelsy, but it does away with blackface minstrelsy's application of burnt cork to the face and instead channels blackness through embodied performance alone. Unlike most forms of blackface minstrelsy, this type of performance lacks the mocking and caricaturizing undercurrents and instead seeks to hide its active appropriation, but it still holds on to the blackness as masculinity trope for white men. I'm sure you can think of many contemporary examples of black bodying, but some of the clearest and most repeated demonstrations, which I discuss in the conclusion to my book, are performed by actor-dancer Channing Tatum. Thank you to some stranger on the internet who compiled this for me. I didn't have to do it myself. So yes, Channing Tatum frequently either performs hip hop dance, which is a black dance. On the right-hand side, he's, you can't quite tell, but he's being Beyonce, a black woman. And on the left-hand side, it's quite complicated, but he's channeling Gene Kelly, channeling black men. So it's complicated. In any case, he does this frequently. Lest you think this pattern is just contained to musicals, let me assure you that it found its way to television and teen films as well in the body of one Elvis the Pelvis Presley. His model of masculinity in the late 50s used a basic wing dance, as described by DeFrance, to draw the eye to his pelvis as he performed his edgy rock and roll music. And you'll see the wing, with his knee. There's his wing. Most people by now probably know that Presley inherited rock and roll music from black performers, but I want to emphasize that he also got his dance moves from the black community. In this case, This sometimes meant borrowing directly from performers like Jackie Wilson, which I'm very proud to say that I found a recording of a jam session from the late 50s where he literally admits that he's trying to copy Jackie Wilson's dance moves. Very proud of that. But more often, it meant combining wing dances, like you see here, with other wild moves like hair choreography and full body shakes, channeling the likes of Little Richard. And even, for those of you who are into jazz, band leader Cab Calloway from decades prior. In all cases, Presley's moves brought attention and controversy to his crotch, leading to a sort of bad boy, highly virile masculinity for him. Many of you have no doubt seen pretty direct echoes of this model in John Travolta and Michael Jackson, right? The lineage continues. This one is also pretty common today. Now, by the time we get to the later mid-century, so late 50s, 1960s, a singular star appears who manages to synthesize all of this history and all of these styles into a playful but coherent mixture. And that person is Sammy Davis Jr. Oops. Okay, just play the thing, please. Is it gonna play? See, I keep hitting the button thinking it's not playing. Just not gonna touch it. There we go. Okay, Sammy Davis Jr. You may remember his humble beginnings where he was constantly on the road, and Davis used this to build his career on observation. Having traveled the vaudeville circuits and seen many, many performers, and being a big lover of cinema and watching many, many Hollywood films, Davis became an expert at imitation and impersonation. While his live shows often used these abilities for comedic purposes, his recorded dances turned this ability into a full body style. Davis grew up among and watched some of the best Black dancers perform, and he also screened films by and rubbed shoulders with enough white Hollywood icons to be familiar with their channelings and refashionings of those dances he grew up with. In fact, he was good friends with Elvis, and you can see them kind of exchanging leg flaps there. So, on the one hand, oh, nope, I lost myself. Hang on. He was good friends with Elvis. Great. Okay. You can actually see both Presley and Kelly style moves in Davis's dances. So here's one. Watch out for the wing dance from Elvis, but also that sort of like bravado, athletic, rooted, bent knee style from Gene Kelly in this clip from Anna Lucasta. This is sort of a drunken haze thing for Eartha Kitt. So you'll see POV shots of her watching him. You also notice that he's playing a sailor, which if you've seen enough Gene Kelly movies, you know that sailors are associated with Gene Kelly. So here you can see his roots in tap dance. And those big expansive steps are very Gene Kelly. Here comes his Elvis moment. Boom. All right. So I also want to emphasize that Sammy's masculinity was very chameleonic and also rather flashy. You don't see it here in this film, but he changed with the times far more readily than most and found a way to make even the more absurd late 60s fashions look cool, including in his pretty absurd role as cult leader Big Daddy in Sweet Charity. I wanted to include tons more clips of Sammy Davis because he's my favorite of my case studies, but I didn't want to derail this. So we can talk more about Sammy in the Q&A. But he was constantly changing his style, but always a little bit over the top about it. So I see him as the dandy that wraps in all of the overperformance of all the other figures. So on the one hand, this made him truly unique and unlike most any other figure of the period. And on the other hand, his ability to shapeshift through other dancer styles also helps us see the range of ways that Black dance had been used to stage those several other masculinities. So, born out of necessity for a young Black boy living in the shadow of blackface minstrelsy, Davis's ability to not only copy pre-existing tropes and types and styles, but also refigure them in a new context gives us a small peek into how such continual remixing brings the lineage toward our contemporary moment. So let me jump forward again to TikTok, where solo dancing young men demonstrate a little of Kelly's muscle. Uh-oh, they're frozen. Don't be frozen. No. No. Okay, we're going to just start the whole slide over and hope that it works happily. It does not. I don't know why these aren't working. Okay, we're just going to go. Kelly's muscle, Elvis's pelvis, and there's the pelvis, okay, and Sammy's fashion-forward adornment. The dances are still rooted in Black vernacular dances. Really, we've come full circle through hip hop back to some Earl Snake Hips Tucker moves here and there. And the same risks of hypersexualized or innately performing Black stereotypes remain for the Black men whose culture originated these cool moves. You'll notice that the Black men are the only ones without shirts on here to encourage us to fetishize their bodies. At the same time, non-Black men continue to profit from these dance moves, both in terms of social capital and monetary capital via Black bodying. But ultimately, these suave and sexy screen danced masculinities have inherited much from the long mid-century and continue to communicate gender norms to young people throughout the country and throughout the world. Thank you.
All right. By the way, I'll take this chance to also thank these people who helped put this thing on. So my school, Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences, now they're actually, it's the school that's sponsoring it, so I won't call it my department at this point. The Office of Community Partnerships, who's gone above and beyond to help support this program over the last couple of years, which has been awesome. And the media folks who actually set me up every month and laugh every time I screw up the media stuff and fix it for me when they can. So that's kind of the idea. So we are giving away. We are, anybody knows, I'm sort of the walking poster child, not quite everything. So we gave away hats for a while. We had shirts. We had socks. I didn't actually get any socks. We are on the last few toques, and this is it's actually perfect season to get your Grit City Think and Drink hat. So we have this month and next month, and then we are going to have to move on to some other type of wear that we're still trying to figure out at this point. So come back for sure.
Hey, folks. What do you got for me? Yeah, Ellen. Love it. Yeah. So I'm going to repeat the question in case the recording or other people couldn't hear. It was basically these young kids on TikTok most likely have not watched a lot of these, classic Hollywood films or other sources of these dances. So how does it trickle down to them? Am I getting that right? And the answer is through the intermediaries. So a lot of them probably have seen Michael Jackson, for example. And in fact, Vic, that white dude on the left there, part of his brand is kind of like remaking 70s and 80s dances that he's seen in things like Saturday Night Fever and Michael Jackson videos. So I'd say, I skipped a couple decades there in the middle, but yeah, if you track through the John Travoltas, the Michael Jacksons, more recently like Usher, D'Angelo, so like singers who also danced. For young kids now, I think Chris Brown is a big one, and so on and so on. So it does move from like movie stars through to music stars thanks to MTV. But yeah, the lineage kind of continues. And I think Michael Jackson is the best example of the connector because he started as a child sharing stages with Sammy Davis Jr. and the Nicholas brothers. And he famously watched a lot of Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly. So Michael Jackson, I think, is the best like node of transference between generations and styles, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's where it goes. Thanks for the question. Anyone else? Questions? Yeah, Jim. Oh, sure. Yeah. So the question was, are there white dancers who haven't appropriated their stuff? And the answer is many of the country Western dancers still do like traditional Europeanist country Western dance. So like a lot of the, that kind of stuff is still in a pretty direct lineage from Europeanist dances. So I'd say it breaks down by genre, things that are more directly connected to Europeanist dance. Like, do you guys remember Riverdance when it was on PBS? Very directly still Europeanist, right? Whereas once you get into music and dance genres that are, associated with Black vernacular culture, hip hop being the big one, that's when you get this appropriative move. So unfortunately for white people, the more popular culture comes from Black folks. So if you want the big audience, you have to make a decision, right? And there are people who find ways to walk that line more respectfully. They will name their sources. They will demonstrate community with the community. So like a lot of people love Eminem for being so clear about the context in which he grew up and how he is using Black music and like recognizing his role as a white hip hop artist. I'd say he's not always great about it, but you know what? He's better than many. So yeah, I think there are ways to engage popular culture that is actually Black culture responsibly. It's just that it's so rare because it's so ingrained that half the time people aren't educated enough to know what's going on. So good question. Yeah, Sarah, and then we'll do Pan. Yeah, the jig. We didn't talk as much about the jig. Yeah. Great question. Okay, so the question was, what is the relationship between buck dancing and tap dancing? The story goes, and this is still a debated story amongst dance historians. The story goes that tap dancing grew out of a combination of Africanist buck dancing and Irish kind of jigging clogging. That's the story, is that, because Irish Americans were at the bottom of the rungs of immigrants, they were most often mixing with Black folk. And so those two styles intermixed. That's the story. Some people don't buy it. Some people are like, no, it's fully Africanist. The Irish just jumped on the bandwagon and like said it was like what they did. It's so hard to know because we don't have visual records, obviously, from like the 1700s and 1800s. But so that's the story. What's fascinating, and I can't remember if this made it into my book or not, Gene Kelly loves to tell the history of tap dance because he's a tap dancer, and he will often say that it's like, yeah, like Black people provided the music, but all the moves come from the Irish. Like he tells stories like that. So part of what I'm aiming to do here is undo that erasure, because the Irish especially, for some reason, feel uncomfortable giving over that ground. And there's lots of complicated political reasons for why that is. But so yes, tap dancing theoretically is the Irish plus the Africanist dance combined. Yep. Pan had a question. This is a great and complicated question. So Pan basically asked about unison movement, which happens a lot on TikTok, but also happens a lot in K-pop dance. And Pan is wondering about like how that fits in with all this and the lineage. It's funny you should ask because I literally gave a talk about this completely separate from my book like a year or two ago. Here's my theory. This is just my theory. I think that the origin of these unison dances goes back to actually minstrelsy, but more visibly to us musicals, where you'd have, and this is a version of what they do on Broadway, where you have like the sort of lead performers and then you have like the chorus or the company, and they're all doing something in unison in the background to like add flavor while the main person is doing whatever they're doing, the star. And in the musicals, this would get more and more elaborate so that you'd start paying more and more attention to the chorus or the company. Where I think the shift happened into something that we see now is music video. So in the 80s, we have a couple of really remarkable choreographers who had a Broadway background, but like are immersed enough in the new music to make the shift that we have. For example, if you watch the old Michael Jackson videos, his backup dancers are like incredible. Partially because one of them is the choreographer. But so that became actually a model for other music videos to do this like unison dance of backup dancers, essentially. That's where K-pop got it, is from watching Western music video. But K-pop refined this practice to complete and utter precision. right? When K-pop does it, it is so precise. It is like rehearsed within an inch of its life. It's almost mechanical, right? So I'd say that where TikTok lands is the influence of the K-pop version, but also the sort of music video origins, Western music video origins of it, so that, you know, we have international cultural mixing at this point, of course. So that's how it fits in. Does it have anything to do with race? Yes, insofar as the choreographer who pioneered this was a Black man working for Michael Jackson. He is very rarely credited for it, which is why I gave the talk, because I was like, no one remembers. His name, he has, I think it's Michael Peters, Michael Roberts. It's like the most normal name. I think it's Michael Peters. Yeah, Michael Peters. And he, like, there's no biographies of him. You kind of have to like trace him through people who knew him or worked with him. I should probably write a book about this guy, because I think he changed everything about dance on screen by changing the way that music videos look in the like mid 80s, 83. So yeah, that's my long-winded answer and my personal theory. I don't know if it's right, but it's where my theory is. Yes, Andrea. So I can't tell you about the histories elsewhere, because my entree into like global performative culture is through the US. So I don't really get to know the global perspective until the 80s with MTV. But what I can tell you about since the 80s with MTV is that it was absolutely this very like Western hegemonic experience, where whatever existing dance and performance cultures there were elsewhere started to morph in response to the MTV that was literally getting pumped into these other countries like on purpose in order to try to create like a hegemonic global youth culture. What's wild is that you can read the documents from MTV where the CEO, I think, has like a written, this is the plan. We will make everywhere love Levi's jeans and Pepsi Cola. And the means through which they do that is establishing this youth culture through MTV, so rock music and our dances. As far as I've been able to trace it, you can still find threads of like regional differences where like the traditional dances are wrapped in, but everything becomes so westernized by like say the year 2000 that it's like it's hard to disentangle that without a deep expertise in whatever region. So I'd say, yeah, by the year 2000, it's all global, like Western hegemonic interweaving. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, how does this all interact with couple dancing rather than just like male solo dancing? It's actually, that's a really good and complicated question. And what it comes down to is the ways in which each individual dance form is commercialized, if you will. So for example, when it comes to swing and jazz dancing, the Lindy Hop became a couples dance. And that was a way to encourage people to dance to the music, especially once it became like white controlled big bands. But there were successive, I guess you could say, eras of jazz, and my jazz heads in the room know this, trying to make jazz that you couldn't dance to as like a political reaction to the heavily commercialized, like white-owned infrastructure around jazz, right? And so with each, I guess you could say, iteration, there's always a version that is a couples dance, still rooted in like the Africanist tradition. So Fred Astaire's like ballroom style dancing that he popularized. He was not the only one doing this, but Vernon and Irene Castle, there's a movie about them starring Fred Astaire, were some of the first to like literally publish a how-to that integrated Black vernacular dances with a Europeanist like waltz structure. And you see that a lot in Fred Astaire's dancing, where he'll do a lot of like tap, but then he will wrap it into European waltzes. So it does continue to happen, just in more complicated ways, because it starts to intersect with like marketing and like trying to sell. There were like pamphlets that explained dance steps and radio programs that you could dance along with. So it became a whole marketing structure when it came to couples dancing, rather than like a star-making soloist experience. So it still happens. It's just more complicated when it comes to the couples dances. Yeah. Right. So that comes from vaudeville, actually. So once minstrelsy starts to intermix with vaudeville, which is the circuit that like Sammy Davis grew up on, is the vaudeville circuit. Um, it's just a lot of competing groups trying to one up each other for the chance at like the slot on the program. And one of the ways that folks started to outcompete each other, and this is absolutely still in like the Africanist tradition, is acrobatics. These were often labeled flash dancers because of the flashiness. And in fact, the Will Maston Trio had some flash elements. Not all of them are flips. There's also other like things you can do on the ground that I'm not going to demonstrate because I'm not good at them. But so that's the origin of that, is vaudeville like showiness. And then, yeah, it became incorporated into some versions of Lindy and swing, and was actually considered very risque. That was the edgy way to dance, but it was also, yeah, like the hot jazz approach. So yeah, it does make its way in there through vaudeville. David. Yes. Okay. So Latin dance styles is a whole other thing, which it's so funny that my colleague in film studies would ask this, because the number one comment on my book as it was going through the revisions is that question, like, where does the Latin dance stuff fit? And I'm like, I can't do a whole additional book on Latin dance, but I can answer you now. So the answer is it also comes in waves and is very much politically rooted in the US's relationship with various Latin countries. So for example, in the 1940s, during the Good Neighbor policy, we imported a lot of carefully chosen Latin dances, partially through Carmen Miranda, for example. But in fact, the Nicholas brothers were in a movie in 1940 called Down Argentina Way. And they sang in Spanish and used maracas and sort of incorporated elements of the mambo, for example. So the unfortunate thing about the way that Latin dances get incorporated is that it's very flattening. There's lots of like conflation of different cultural contexts. In fact, I'm pretty sure Down Argentina Way was banned in Argentina precisely because they were like, that's not our culture, y'all. Like, nice try. So it's complicated. But yeah, generally it's a political act. In the 50s and 60s, when there are crazes around Latin dances, like the conga, they get incorporated because they're popular. So it's one of those starts out in the world and then ends up on screen, rather than in the 40s, it started on screen and then kind of spread from there. There's a great book called Latin Numbers by Brian Herrera that does a good job of expanding on all this. And it's got a Carmen Miranda cover. It's like a very, very bright cover. But yeah, Latin Numbers by Brian Herrera, if you're interested in the Latin part. I think I'm getting shoot off. Thank you guys. I appreciate it.